Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer, thanks to the Mazder13 for this one. Amy plays Show and Tell, and she wants to put Overwhelming Splendor into play attached to Nick. Is this possible? Alright, so the first thing that I wanted to point out is that of course, Show and Tell is definitely able to put enchantments onto the battlefield. Now, that being said, this question is a little bit more interesting than it might seem at first glance. And that's because you basically can't do anything in a game of Magic unless there's something saying that you can do that. So, for example, it wouldn't be possible for you to arbitrarily decide that you wanted to sacrifice a creature. There has to be something in the game saying that you can sacrifice that creature. So, you may be able to see what the issue is here. The Show and Tell definitely does say that you can put that Overwhelming Splendor onto the battlefield. However, it does not say anything at all about attaching it to anything. And so that makes the answer a little bit less clear. Fortunately for Amy, there is this rule here that helps her out. Anytime an aura is entering the battlefield through any means other than being cast as a spell, that means that you're going to be able to choose something from among the legal things that it could enchant as it's entering the battlefield, and it'll enter the battlefield enchanting that object or player. So what that means is that Amy is indeed able to play Show and Tell and then put this Overwhelming Splendor into play attached to Nick, just like she's hoping. Okay, so that worked out pretty well for Amy, but not very well for Nick. Let's see if we can maybe think of some ways that we could help him out here. The first thing that might be on somebody's mind is maybe something like a Monk Realist. So, for example, if you wanted to put that into play with Show and Tell, would it be possible to destroy the Overwhelming Splendor that Amy also put into play? And so the answer to this one is no. Immediately after anything happens in the game checks to see if there's any triggered abilities that have triggered. Immediately after those permanents are put onto the battlefield, the game is going to see that, well, there is a creature that entered the battlefield, but that creature does not have any abilities. What that means is that there's no trigger that's going to happen from the creature that Nick put into play at the same time as Overwhelming Splendor. Alright, so that's bad news with strike one. It would work if Nick was using something like an Aura Shards, and all he needed was something like a creature entering the battlefield to get the triggered ability to trigger. But if he just had the Monk Realist entering the battlefield without anything else, well, that wouldn't do it. Alright, so the next thing on some people's minds might be something like a Leyline of Sanctity. If Nick put that into play with Show and Tell, would that save him? And so the answer to this one is unfortunately also no. See, hexproof only does something if you're actually becoming the target of a spell or ability. Now, if you are playing the Overwhelming Splendor from your hand like a normal aura spell, well, that would indeed be considered to be targeting Nick. That's because the enchant keyword ability has the word target baked into its definition in the comprehensive rules. On the other hand, if you're putting the aura into play through some other means and then having it be attached to Nick, well, that might thematically seem like you're targeting him, but unfortunately that's not what the game rules say. The one that I had pulled up does not use the word target anywhere in it, so this does not count as targeting Nick. It would not be possible to stop Nick from getting enchanted with this curse, even if Nick started the game out with the Leyline of Sanctity in play. Okay, so now for the final one, and I think this is the most spicy of all, by a wide margin. What if Nick was going to have something like a Runed Halo? Could Nick have a Runed Halo, naming Overwhelming Splendor, and save himself from this fate? Okay, so first of all, I want to say that if Nick had the Overwhelming Splendor in play before the Show and Tell, well, that would be really good for him. If Nick has protection from Overwhelming Splendor, then when Amy is deciding what permanent or player she wants to have this aura attached to, well, she can only choose among legal things that it could enchant. Of course, if you have protection from Overwhelming Splendor, it is not legal for Overwhelming Splendor to enchant you. That means that Amy would not be able to choose Nick to be the thing that the curse enters attached to. Unless there's some other player that does not have protection from Overwhelming Splendor, she would be forced to go with, well, the only other player available, herself. Now, that's almost certainly not what Amy wants to see, so let's see if we can take things a step farther. Maybe we could make Nick's play a little bit less prediction reliant and put the Runed Halo into play with Show and Tell at the same time as Overwhelming Splendor. Would we be able to get such fantastic results? And, well, this one is really a head scratcher. So if we're taking a look at what's going to happen, the Overwhelming Splendor has you choose something that it's going to enchant as it's entering the battlefield. Now, that's extremely interesting because you know what else happens as something is entering the battlefield? That's right, choosing a name for Runed Halo. Both of these cards have you choose something as they're entering the battlefield. and Show and Tell puts both of those permanents onto the battlefield at the same time. That means that both of these players are going to be asked to be making these choices simultaneously. Now that is really interesting. It's not really clear which player would have to make the choice first, and of course, it definitely matters which one would do first because it affects what the legal objects that the Overwhelming Splendor might be able to enchant are. So for this case, we have this rule here. It says that if both players are being asked to make a choice at the same time, then the active player, the player whose turn it is going to make that choice first. Afterwards, the non-active player is going to make the choice. So what that would mean in this situation is that Amy will first say which player that she wants to have the Overwhelming Splendor enchanting. Now, this is good news for her because it means that she gets to make that choice before Nick gets to choose a card name with Ruined Halo. Accordingly, when Amy is saying what player that her curse will be attached to, she does not have the situation that she had before where Nick was an invalid choice because he had protection from that card name. The Ruined Halo isn't giving Nick protection from anything just yet. So if Amy picks Nick, then after that, Nick is going to be able to choose any card name he wants with the Ruined Halo. He could choose Overwhelming Splendor or some different card name, but the important thing to note is that Amy was able to put the curse onto Nick. Now, assuming that Nick chooses the card Overwhelming Splendor to have protection from, then that means that the next time state-based actions are performed, the game is going to see that Nick has protection from some enchantment that he's enchanted by, and that enchantment will be put into Amy's graveyard as the state-based action. Okay, so there is one more situation that I wanted to talk about before I sign off, and that's going to be the exact same situation, except we're going to change which player has which card. So this time, we're going to have Amy get the Ruined Halo and Nick have the Overwhelming Splendor. And let's see how changing this up affects what the answer is. So just like before, we're going to have the same exact thing where Amy has to make her decision first because she's the active player. So in that case, that means she's going to have to name a card for Ruined Halo before Nick names a player with the Overwhelming Splendor. So of course, we're going to have Amy name Overwhelming Splendor as the card that she's going to get protection from. So now Nick's turn to make a decision. Now, let's examine exactly what's going on here. The Overwhelming Splendor and the Ruined Halo are not on the battlefield yet. Remember, all these decisions are being made immediately before the Show and Tell puts both those permanents into play. And so what that means is that Amy is not going to have protection from anything just quite yet. Accordingly, it is going to be possible for Nick to name Amy as the person that he's putting the Overwhelming Splendor onto. Now, of course, immediately afterwards, the game is going to do state-based actions, and it's going to see that Amy has protection from an enchantment that is enchanting her, so at that point the Overwhelming Splendor would be put into Nick's graveyard. However, at least Nick is not going to be stuck in that unenviable position that we talked about before, where he was forced to put the curse onto himself. Alright, now this was a really interesting question with a lot of interesting sub-scenarios. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed getting to do all the research in order to get these answers for everyone. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again tomorrow for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.